The wedding was nothing short of magical. Clara Reynolds was the bride everyone envied, marrying the man of her dreams, Tom, in a beautiful ceremony. But beneath the joy, something far darker was simmering, something no one could have ever anticipated. David. Grant, the best man, had been by Tom's side for years. He was the epitome of the loyal friend, steady, trustworthy, always there when needed. But there was a secret hidden behind his carefully composed smile. He wasn't just Tom's best friend. He had been secretly in love with Clara for years. The night wore on. A sudden hush fell over the reception. The guests, mid-celebration, were stunned as Clara's body was discovered, lifeless in her bridal suite. The laughter died, the music stopped, and what had been a dream evening for Clara turned into a nightmare. Clara hadn't passed away from a simple accident or a health issue. The cause of death was much more sinister: poisoning. And the shocking twist. The best man, David Grant, was the one who had carefully orchestrated it. In a night meant to celebrate love, David's twisted feelings for the bride led to a tragic, fatal conclusion. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a far more complicated truth. Was it love gone wrong, or was Clara's death the result of a much darker secret buried between friends? Brookfield, a small, quiet town nestled in the rolling hills, was the perfect setting for a wedding. It was a place where neighbors knew each other by name, and where the happiest occasions were celebrated in community halls and charming venues. The air was filled with the scent of fresh-cut flowers, and the streets were lined with people eager to share in the joy of Clara and Tom's union. For a town like Brookfield, a wedding was not just a personal celebration. It was an event that brought everyone together. Clara Reynolds, 28, was the epitome of grace and beauty. She was the kind of woman who radiated warmth, admired by friends and loved by all. A kindergarten teacher, Clara had a soft spot for children and was known for her generous spirit. Her wedding to Tom Reynolds, a well-respected local businessman, was the talk of the town. The couple had known each other since high school, and their relationship had always seemed like a fairy tale. Tom's best friend, David Grant, was a familiar figure in their lives. Tall, with a quiet, reserved demeanor, David had stood by Tom through every milestone. He was the dependable, steady type until the night of the wedding. His deep, unspoken love for Clara had never been shared with anyone, not even Tom. It was a secret he kept hidden behind a smile, but that secret would soon unravel with devastating consequences. The wedding was a success, a picture-perfect event that would be remembered for years to come. The ceremony was filled with touching vows, smiles exchanged, and heartfelt speeches from family and friends. Clara and Tom looked every bit the happy couple. After the ceremony, the guests made their way to the reception hall, a grand venue that had been transformed into a sea of fairy lights, soft music, and laughter. The mood was lively, with people dancing, mingling, and toasting to the newlyweds. David Grant stood in the corner of the room, a glass of champagne in hand, but his mind was elsewhere. As the best man, he had given the expected speech, a few words of praise for his best friend, a light-hearted joke about their shared past. But as the night unfolded, his thoughts were consumed by something darker, his unrequited love for Clara. For years he had been her confidant, her friend, and while he had stood by her side in every major moment of her life, he had always remained in the shadows. His feelings for Clara had only deepened over time, and now, as she stood beside Tom, her husband, it felt as though everything he had hoped for had slipped through his fingers. But tonight wasn't just about feelings of jealousy. It was about something far more dangerous. While the other guests were busy celebrating, David's eyes never left Clara. He watched as she laughed with Tom, her beauty shining through, and something inside him snapped. The plan, which had been simmering for weeks, was finally coming to fruition. David had been methodical, calculating every step. In the days leading up to the wedding, he had learned that Clara had been feeling unwell. The wedding preparations had taken a toll on her health, stress, exhaustion, and the weight of a life-changing event. He had seen this as an opportunity. At the reception, he discreetly made his move. He had gone to the bar, slipping the poison into Clara's drink, just enough to take effect gradually, ensuring no one would suspect anything until it was too late. The poison was undetectable at first. It was a slow-acting compound designed to make its victim appear disoriented, fatigued, even intoxicated. Clara took a few sips from her glass as she moved through the reception, chatting with guests and smiling. But soon, something started to feel off. She began to feel dizzy, her vision blurred. Her movements grew sluggish, and she had to sit down leaning against a table to steady herself. Tom, oblivious to the fact that his best man was responsible, noticed her sudden change and asked if she was okay. Clara assured him she was just tired. She had been running on little sleep with all the wedding preparations. But as the night wore on, Clara's condition worsened. She began to feel nauseous and disoriented, and her once bright smile began to fade. Tom, concerned, helped her up and led her to the bridal suite, hoping some rest would do her good. But as they entered the room, Clara collapsed to the floor, her body going limp. Tom was frantic. He shouted for help, but it was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. In the chaos that followed, no one initially suspected foul play. Clara's condition was puzzling but not immediately alarming. The guests assumed it was just the stress of the day catching up to her. But within minutes, it became apparent that Clara was not simply tired. She was unresponsive, her body unable to move or react. The wedding that had been filled with joy and excitement now turned into a scene of confusion and terror. By the time paramedics arrived, Clara was already gone. She had died before anyone had a chance to help her. The initial cause of death was unclear, but the medical team quickly began to suspect poisoning. The way her body had reacted so suddenly, the rapid decline in her health, made it evident that the cause was deliberate. As the investigation began, the police quickly turned their attention to the people closest to Clara: her new husband, Tom, and her best man, David. Initially, there were no signs of foul play, but Detective Leora Nash, the lead investigator, wasn't convinced that Clara's sudden death was an accident. Her experience told her that the timing was too strange, the circumstances too convenient. The first sign of trouble came when it was revealed that Clara's drink had been poisoned. The cocktail she had sipped from had been tampered with. And the most unsettling part? The poison had been introduced during the reception, within reach of only a few people, one of whom was David Grant. Detective Nash interviewed the guests, and those closest to Clara, but everyone seemed to be in shock. No one could explain what had happened, and no one could believe that something so sinister had occurred during a wedding. The truth, however, was hiding in plain sight, and as Detective Nash started to dig deeper, she uncovered a disturbing motive. David's unspoken love for Clara and his obsession with her had become the spark for a deadly act that had ruined the lives of everyone involved. The sudden, inexplicable death of Clara Reynolds cast a shadow over the entire town of Brookfield. What was initially perceived as a tragic accident soon turned into a full-fledged homicide investigation. Detective Leora Nash, known for her meticulous approach to cases, took over the investigation. She knew that there was more to Clara's death than the initial signs suggested. The first piece of the puzzle came from the autopsy. Clara had not died of natural causes or sudden health complications, as some had speculated. The toxicology report revealed a clear and chilling truth. Clara had been poisoned. The poison had been introduced into her system through the glass of wine she had consumed earlier that evening. The substance was a rare compound, difficult to detect unless specifically tested for, and it acted slowly, allowing time for the perpetrator to cover their tracks before the effects set in. But who could have had access to Clara's drink? Detective Nash's first course of action was to examine the list of people who had been in close proximity to Clara during the wedding. The reception had been lively, and Clara had interacted with numerous guests, but the most obvious individuals were the people closest to her: her husband, Tom, and her best man, David Grant Tom. Understandably distraught over his wife's sudden death, was cooperative with the authorities. His alibi was solid. He had been with Clara almost every moment before she collapsed. He had helped her to the bridal suite when she started feeling unwell, and he was the one who had called for help. He was cleared of any involvement, but Detective Nash knew that the key to this case lay in David Grant's hands. David had seemed like the perfect best man, loyal, dependable, and trustworthy. But Detective Nash knew better than to trust appearances. A deeper look into David's relationship with Clara revealed a growing tension that no one had noticed. Jenna, Clara's close friend, recalled a conversation she had had with Clara months before the wedding. Clara had mentioned that David's behavior was starting to become strange. He had been too attentive, too involved in her life, and Clara had felt uncomfortable with his constant presence. At first, Clara had brushed it off as a harmless display of friendship, but over time, she had begun to feel that David's feelings for her went beyond friendship. Clara had started to distance herself from David, though she had never mentioned it to anyone in her inner circle. Jenna recalled Clara saying, "He's like a brother, but sometimes it feels like he wants more than that." This newfound insight into David's obsession with Clara raised red flags for Detective Nash. She knew that emotional distress could often lead to unexpected actions, and David's deep feelings for Clara, which he had kept hidden for so long, could very well have been the motive behind the murder. The next step in the investigation was to look at David's movements during the wedding. Security footage from the reception showed David mingling with guests, making his way through the crowd. He was often seen near the bar where the wine was served, and in the moments leading up to Clara's poisoning, he was seen talking to her briefly before she took her glass of wine. But nothing in the footage suggested that David had done anything overtly suspicious. No handoff, no direct contact with Clara's drink. However, a breakthrough came when investigators looked into David's phone records. They found something unexpected. In the days leading up to the wedding, David had been making a series of private calls to a local chemical supplier. The calls were frequent, and the timing was troubling. Most of them occurred after David had been informed about the wedding plans, long before Clara's death. The investigation soon uncovered that David had placed an order for a rare poison, one that matched the substance found in Clara's system. This was the pivotal moment in the investigation. David's actions were no longer just a suspicious coincidence. They pointed directly to premeditated murder. Detective Nash obtained a warrant to search David's home, and what they found was chilling. Hidden in a drawer in his study was a small vial of the same poison that had killed Clara. There were also several written journals, notes detailing his emotional struggles, and a disturbing admission of his feelings for Clara. The journals described his increasing obsession with her, his desire to be the one by her side, and how he felt betrayed by her marriage to Tom. The investigation team also discovered a hidden email account, one that David had been using to send anonymous messages to Clara, expressing his unspoken love, and how he had always been there for her. He had made it clear that he wanted more than just friendship, but Clara had never responded to his advances. It was evident from his messages that he had hoped Clara would one day choose him over Tom, but that day had never come. The discovery of the poison vial and the incriminating journals gave Detective Nash the final piece of the puzzle. David Grant had not only murdered Clara but had done so out of jealousy and unrequited love. His actions had been calculated. He had waited until the perfect moment during the wedding to slip the poison into Clara's wine. His plan had been to ensure that Clara would suffer, just as he had suffered from her rejection. But even with this damning evidence, the question remained: how far would David go to keep his secret hidden? As the investigation progressed, more questions began to surface about David's role in the lives of those around him. His obsession with Clara and his manipulations weren't just isolated to the wedding night. They were part of a much larger, darker pattern of behavior. As the investigation into David Grant's role in Clara's death seemed to be reaching its conclusion, Detective Leora Nash received an unexpected phone call that would change the direction of the case entirely. It came from an anonymous tipster who claimed to have crucial information about David's relationship with Clara, and it wasn't what anyone had suspected. The tipster, a former employee at the chemical supplier where David had purchased the poison, revealed that David had not acted alone. The employee claimed that David had been in contact with someone else before the wedding, a person who had not been identified in the initial investigation. The tipster hinted at an illicit business connection, suggesting that David may have been involved in something far more dangerous than a love affair gone wrong. Curious and suspicious, Detective Nash decided to dig deeper into David's financial records. The results were shocking. There was evidence of substantial money transfers from David to a separate bank account, one that didn't appear to belong to him. The account was linked to someone named Alex Stone, a name that had never come up in the investigation. The deeper Nash dug, the more she uncovered about Alex Stone, a former associate of David who had been involved in shady dealings in the past. Stone had a criminal history related to fraud and blackmail, and it appeared that David and Stone had maintained contact under the radar for months. But what could this mean for Clara's death? The revelation that David had ties to a criminal element cast a new light on the case. Had Clara's death been part of a larger scheme that involved money, power, and secrets that went beyond love and jealousy? Detective Nash soon discovered that David's involvement with Alex Stone had been more than just financial. The two had been working together on a series of fraudulent transactions, using Clara's unsuspecting trust to cover their tracks. David had been using Clara's social connections, her job, her friendships, her reputation, to launder money for their illegal activities. It seemed that Clara's death wasn't merely a product of David's obsession with her, but rather a necessary step to silence someone who had unknowingly become a pawn in his larger plan. Clara had begun to uncover some of the financial discrepancies involving David's dealings, which was likely why she had been planning to confront him. Before her death, she had mentioned to a close friend that she thought David might be involved in something unsavory and had been planning to investigate. In her last few weeks, Clara had become more distant from David, which may have contributed to his decision to eliminate her. He couldn't afford for her to expose the truth, not when so much was at stake. David's betrayal of Clara took on an even darker form. She wasn't just a woman he loved, she was a threat to his entire operation. By poisoning her, David had ensured that she would never speak out about his crimes. But the more Detective Nash uncovered, the clearer it became that Clara's death was part of a much larger conspiracy, one that extended far beyond the personal and into the criminal. The final revelation came when Detective Nash obtained additional evidence from Alex Stone's criminal associates. It was discovered that David had used the wedding as a cover for his operation, an event filled with family and friends, a perfect opportunity to carry out his plan without suspicion. The wedding, an occasion meant to celebrate love, had become the stage for a carefully orchestrated murder. David had not only manipulated Clara and Tom, but he had also taken advantage of his position as the best man to execute his plan. The slow poisoning of Clara was just the beginning. David's true intention was much more sinister. He wanted to protect himself from exposure, and he had used Clara's death as the key to maintaining control over his dangerous operations. The discovery of these additional layers of manipulation and criminality stunned the local authorities. Clara's death, initially seen as a tragic and senseless act driven by jealousy, now appeared to be part of a much larger, more complex scheme. What had started as a simple affair had transformed into a web of lies, fraud, and murder, one that David Grant had been weaving for months, perhaps even years. As the investigation moved forward, the shocking revelations surrounding David Grant's involvement in Clara's death sent shockwaves through the small town of Brookfield. The new information not only solidified David's role in the murder, but also revealed the far-reaching consequences of his actions, beyond his relationship. with Clara and his best friend, Tom Reynolds. With mounting evidence of financial fraud, illegal activities, and manipulation, the case began to gain significant media attention. As David's trial approached, the courtroom was filled with tension. The prosecution team, led by District Attorney Lauren Collins, prepared for a high-stakes trial that would determine whether David Grant would face the full consequences of his actions. The defense, however, was determined to present a different narrative, one that painted David as a man driven to desperate measures by his emotions and fears. The battle lines were drawn, and the legal drama was about to unfold. The prosecution's case was built around the overwhelming evidence of premeditated murder. They focused on David's purchase of the poison, his journal entries revealing his obsession with Clara, and his involvement in criminal activities with Alex Stone. The prosecution also highlighted the disturbing fact that David had poisoned Clara at the wedding, an event meant to be a celebration of love and happiness, which had been twisted into a tragic and deadly plot. District Attorney Collins presented Clara's death as the culmination of David's deep-seated emotional turmoil. His unrequited love for Clara had turned into an obsession, which ultimately led him to eliminate the one person who could expose his fraudulent activities. The poison, they argued, was not just a method of silencing a lover. David had used it as a tool to protect his secrets, and in doing so, had destroyed the lives of everyone around him. The prosecution's key witness was Sarah Matthews, a close friend of Clara's who had survived the poisoning. Sarah's testimony was vital, as she not only provided insight into Clara's final moments, but also revealed her own experience of being poisoned by David. Though Sarah's survival seemed like a stroke of luck, her presence in the courtroom was crucial in painting a picture of David's calculated actions. The defense attempted to cast doubt on Sarah's account, but her unwavering testimony only reinforced the prosecution's argument that David had orchestrated the poisonings with a clear intent. The defense, led by attorney Thomas Harris, sought to portray David as a man who had acted out of emotional desperation. They argued that David's actions were not premeditated, but driven by overwhelming emotions and a fear of losing Clara. Harris painted a picture of a man struggling with his unrequited love, a man who had been pushed to the brink by a combination of jealousy, betrayal, and personal failure. They claimed that David had never intended for Clara to die, but rather the poisoning was a tragic accident that spiraled out of control. They also highlighted David's long-standing friendship with Tom Reynolds, suggesting that David's love for Clara had clouded his judgment, leading to a momentary lapse in reason. Despite their efforts, the defense's argument was weak in the face of the damning evidence presented by the prosecution. The journals detailing David's obsession with Clara, the financial records implicating him in fraudulent activities, and the poison itself left little room for doubt. The jury was left to decide whether David Grant's actions had been the result of an emotional breakdown or a calculated, cold-blooded murder. As the trial progressed, the courtroom became a battleground of emotions. David sat silently in the defendant's chair, his once composed demeanor now shattered. He had spent years hiding behind a mask of loyalty and friendship, but the truth of his crimes was slowly unraveling in front of him. He had betrayed not only his best friend, but also the woman he claimed to love. His attempts to shield himself from the consequences of his actions now appeared futile. The closing arguments were the final moment of the trial. District Attorney Collins made a powerful statement, urging the jury to consider the full scope of David's actions. She reminded them that Clara's death had not been an impulsive act of love gone wrong. It had been the calculated move of a man who had used his best friend's wedding as the perfect opportunity to silence a woman who had uncovered his darkest secrets. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to see David as a man who had been overwhelmed by his feelings and who had lost control in a moment of emotional distress. After deliberating for several hours, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the verdict, and David Grant's life was forever changed. The charges against him were severe, and the sentencing would follow shortly after. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His actions had cost Clara her life, destroyed his relationship with Tom, and shattered the lives of everyone who had once trusted him. His reputation, built over years of friendship and loyalty, was now nothing more than a distant memory. As the sentence was handed down, the courtroom was filled with a mixture of emotions. For Clara's family and friends, the conviction brought a sense of closure, but it could never erase the pain of losing her. For Tom Reynolds, the man who had once called David his best friend, the sense of betrayal would last a lifetime. David's sentencing marked the end of the legal process, but the impact of his actions would ripple through the lives of everyone involved. Brookfield, a town once defined by its closeness and community, had been irrevocably changed by the deadly secrets that had been uncovered on what should have been a day of celebration. The trial and sentencing of David Grant brought some measure of closure to the tragic events that unfolded on the night of Clara Reynolds' wedding. Clara, who had once been the bright light in Brookfield, was gone, and her death exposed a web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that no one could have predicted. For her family and friends, justice had been served, but the emotional scars left by her untimely death would never truly heal. David Grant, once a trusted friend and confidant, had been exposed as the murderer of the woman he claimed to love. His conviction for first-degree murder ensured that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, paying for the calculated decision he made to silence Clara. But for Tom Reynolds, the betrayal was far deeper. Not only had his best friend turned out to be the killer, but Tom also had to live with the fact that he had unknowingly trusted someone who had harbored such dark intentions. The case had torn apart relationships and shattered the illusion of safety and trust within a close-knit community. The question remains, how well can we ever truly know the people closest to us? David's double life and the deadly secrets he kept hidden for so long serve as a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly stable relationships. Clara's murder wasn't just about an affair gone wrong. It was about a man driven by obsession and a desperate need to control those around him. As the town of Brookfield attempts to recover from the devastating loss, the memory of Clara Reynolds and the shocking events of that night will linger in the minds of everyone who was touched by her life. A wedding that should have marked the beginning of a new chapter ended in death, and the fallout from that tragic night will echo through the community for years to come.